Everybody, thanks for watching. I'm amazed at how much of our history has been destroyed, and hidden away from African American people. We have a lot of accomplishments as Africans that have been covered up for hundreds of years. And a lot of people walking around believing that the Africans was primitive, they was unsophisticated, we didn't have any kind of technology, any kind of, structure as a people during ancient times. A lot of people believe that the Africans was just savages running around butt naked until the white man came and saved us, from a life of sin and destruction. Usually you get that argument from, racist white people who, just are ignorant about the accomplishments of African people who have done absolutely no research. And the thing is, sometimes when you try to explain what we have done as people, talk about as, African people, when you try to put the information out there, for some reason, racist people and some other white people get this whole notion that because we are talking about our history, we are being pro-black, we are being anti-white. Because we are talking about the accomplishments of African people, that we are somehow being racist. And the whole thing is, we have to put this information out there because there is it's a system in place to cover it up. And, that has been proven. This is easy to see when I speak about some of these things I'm going to show you in this video. Most of you have never heard of this stuff before. And, that's my point. The thing is, you have the school system, the whole education system, who taught us about slavery, but did not talk about the things I'm going to talk about in this video. They didn't show us the accomplishments of African people. They told us we came from Africa, but they didn't tell us what we did before slavery. And this is the problem. So now, I don't want nobody getting offended by what I'm going to talk about in this video. So there's no reason for anybody to get offended about history, because that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be showing you facts and proof and getting this information out there. Nobody should be feeling uncomfortable because a black man is talking about African history. This is ridiculous. We hear about history all the time, but for some reason, when we start talking about black history, somebody gets offended. But let's get right into it because I have a lot of information to show you. So let's go straight to ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet first. Because when we look at our way of life today, when we look at the structure of our society today, we can go back and we can find it in ancient Egypt. We can find, a governmental structure. We can find architecture, agriculture. We can find mining, farming. We can find all these things back in ancient Egypt. Math, science, astrology, geometry. We can find in ancient Kemet before any European civilization came to be. We can find these things. Now, a lot of people run to religion, to look for, mystery and wonder, awe, and to be inspired by something. People run to religious doctrines, but we can go back to ancient Egypt and we can find so much mystery there. A lot of things that have not been, figured out. A lot of things that are still being discovered. We can go to ancient Egypt and find, mystery and find wonder and find things that today we find incredibly impossible to replicate. And these are the accomplishments of African people. And we have to look at these and say, how did they do this? And anybody who studies Kemet knows what I'm talking about. Anybody who has ever been there can look around and see that, this is something that we today feel like was impossible to create so long ago. So how did they do it? We look at things around the world and we say, this is amazing, this is nice, but we don't get the coverage about ancient Egypt. You don't see it on the news. You don't see commercials advertising for people to go vacation in Egypt. You don't see this stuff because they want to hide the accomplishments of African people because, contrary to popular belief, Kemet was African. It was black. When you get there, it is undeniable. Now, they can show you movies and they can show you stuff on TV to cast doubt on you, to make you doubt, well, maybe it was a white civilization. But when you go there, when you actually go there, when you get there and you see what's there, it is undeniable, it is unmistakable that this was an African civilization that, came up and was built by African people. Now, a lot of people have been tricked into believing that, you know, the symbolism in ancient Egypt, the pyramids, all of it has something to do with the devil and Satan. You know, people believe that aliens built the pyramids. If you watch this show called Ancient Aliens, you know, they're talking about aliens probably came down and built the pyramids because, you know, African people cannot have accomplished such a thing. You know, they spent millions of dollars on this production. It had to cost millions of dollars, you know, just for the spot. They spent all this money to try to take away the accomplishments of African people by saying, you know, these Africans was too stupid to build this. They was too primitive to build those pyramids. They couldn't have done it. So we got to find another explanation, you know, as to how these pyramids was built, because they can't tell you how they was built. But I mean, the pyramid of Khufu alone is enough to show you how great African people is, you know, how great the ancient Egyptians were. When you look at it, it's over 2,300,000 stones placed in precise precision. Each stone weighing between 2 and 70 tons, stacked 481 feet high. The limestone casing, the outer casing that was there on the pyramids before, you know, the Muslims came and stripped it away to build their mosques and temples. But the limestone casing, the outer casing, the stones weigh between 10 and 15 tons each. All of this stacked on a solid base spanning 756 feet. That's 13 acres, almost 10 football fields. I mean, it curved at an angle, at a 51-degree angle. It was so precise that it lines up perfectly with the 4 cardinal points of a compass. I mean, that means if you take the pyramid and you set it on top of a compass, I mean, the points will line up perfectly. That's how precise they was. And we know, you know, all 3 great pyramids, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, they all, you know, line up with the stars on Orion's belt. So when we look at this, I mean, anybody who studies Egypt, you know about all this stuff already. You already know how impossible it seems that the pyramids, you know, are to, you know, have been built. And still today, people can't tell you. Nobody can tell you how exactly they've done it. And nobody can replicate it to, you know, the precise specifications that they are, you know, right now. The pyramids are amazing. So we're talking about this amazing monument, Khufu's pyramid alone. You know, here you have a pyramid dedicated to an African king built by African people. It's an amazing thing. And people want to tell you that that's evil because they don't understand it. That's the devil because they don't understand it. You know, because it was stolen and used on a dollar bill, and everybody want to place it under Illuminati and, you know, and Satan. And these pyramids was here long before any of that. And the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Great Pyramid is the last wonder of the ancient world still left standing. And the thing is, there are pyramids all over the earth. North America, South America, Japan, China. We find pyramids all over the world. But your religious books do not talk about these pyramids. Your religious books do not talk about the pyramids of Giza. Now, the Bible speaks a lot about Egypt, but it doesn't talk about the pyramids. And I'm not talking about where you think it could possibly be talking about the pyramids. It doesn't mention specifically 3 pyramids, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, that align exactly with the stars on Orion's belt. It gives you, you know, the measurements of Noah's Ark. It gives you the measurements of Solomon's temple. It talks about it. 3 cubits, 20 cubits, this and that. It doesn't give you the specifications of the pyramid of Khufu, like I just gave it to you. It doesn't talk about this great monument that is there in Egypt today that is so, you know, unbelievable. And, you know, before that time, you can't find anything to rival, you know, the pyramid of Khufu. Years after it was built, you can't find nothing on the planet to rival it at all. So why doesn't the Bible mention it? It gives you these fictional things. An ark, can't find it, can't prove it was ever built. Solomon's temple, can't find it, can't prove it was ever built. But it doesn't mention this real pyramid that is amazing, that exists, that is still there to this day, and how it was built. So that's something you need to think about before you keep, you know, running to the Bible trying to find, you know, mystery. And the thing is, you know, the Egyptians wasn't just good at building. They wasn't just masters at, you know, science and math and astrology. They even had sports. They had marathons. They had fencing. They had gymnastics. They had martial arts. We can go back 2300 BCE in the tomb of Ptahhotep and find a depiction of wrestling competitions. They had wrestling competitions with the Nubians. The Nubians used to come up and they held these competitions. Still to this day, Nubia has these wrestling competitions. But, you know, we look at these things and a lot of people don't attribute them to Africans. You know, they had so many things. You know, they had they made vases, they had jewelry, they made makeup, board games, dolls, toys. All these things we can find in ancient Kemet, made by Africans long before any European civilization came into power. We can go back and find these things. And nobody wants to attribute these things to African people, to the accomplishments of African people, and to the accomplishments of the ancient Egyptians. We just like, you know, we all of a sudden got toys, and we all of a sudden have gymnastics and martial arts, and nobody wants to talk about where it came from and who was the originator and who created these things, because they don't want to let you know the accomplishments of African people. Now, there is no debate whether or not the ancient Egyptians was black or not, whether they was white or Arab or what have you. There is no debate. There is only ignorant people who have done no research, who believe what they see on TV, and there are the facts. And the facts show clearly that the ancient Egyptians was African, that they was black people. They described themselves as being black people. We can find examples of that in the tomb of Ramses III and in the temple of Seti I. They describe themselves as being black people, as being African. Many Greek scholars describe the Egyptians as being black. You know, Herodotus, Diodorus, a lot of people back then during those Greek times, I mean, because they was right there across from Kemet, they was doing deals with the Egyptians. They had to communicate with them. We know about Heraklion, the sunken city that was found by Frank Gaudio. We know about this sunken city, so we know they was doing trade with the Greeks. So of course they would know if they was black or not. So they were black. Look at the hieroglyphics. We see clearly that they was black. Now, this is Ramses II and a Tutsi warrior. Look at that hair. Find me a European with that hair. Find me an Arab with that hair. Look at the skull shape. Look at the shape of the head. You see this all the time in Africa. Find me a European with that skull shape, or an Arab with that skull shape. You won't find it. Plain and simple. This is Tutankhamun, or King Tut. I mean, look at how dark his skin is. Black as night. Ain't no white man or Arab gonna have a statue made of himself with his skin being that black. Look at his father, Akhenaten, or Amenhotep IV, who is, by the way, the first person on record to speak about monotheism, which is the belief in one God. And they would have you think that, you know, Moses was the first one to talk about, you know, one God, you know, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Noah and all that. Monotheism did not begin with Moses. The earliest we can find it that we can prove is with Akhenaten. Now, we don't have any proof that Moses even existed. We don't have any proof that Moses wrote anything before 1000 BCE. We don't have any proof at all. Do we have proof of Akhenaten? Yes, we have his body. We have his ancient writings written in stone. We got the man's body. It's a black man. Plain and simple. Do we have any biblical writings that predate 1000 BCE? Any biblical writings? No, we do not. As a matter of fact, the oldest religious writings on earth is in Saqqara, Egypt, in the pyramids of Unis, Teti, and Pepi. They are the oldest religious writings, going back at least 2400 BCE. Now, when you go look in your Bible, as I've shown you before, you go look in it back and it shows you that, you know, the whole Exodus story took place between, 1635 and 1491 BCE. So these pyramids was there. Those writings was there, I should say. Those writings was there before your Exodus story even took place, before Moses even, freed the Jews, which it didn't, never happen. No Jews was ever held captive in Kemet. There's no proof of that nowhere. Now, the ancient Egyptians talked about their battles with the Hittites. They talk about their battles with the Hyksos. They talk about a lot of their battles with people, who was coming in, invaders. They had a name for it. And the whole thing is, you don't find anything about the Jews. You don't find nothing about Moses and the Exodus. You don't find nothing about, Moses coming in there, performing all these miracles in front of Ramses II, or performing these miracles about, locusts and, turning a staff into a snake. You don't find none of this stuff. You don't find nothing about the firstborn of all of Egypt dying. You would think that the ancient Egyptians would have, built some kind of monument to the kids, to the firstborn who died in Egypt because of Moses, or because of what the Pharaoh didn't do because God hardened his heart. You don't find that. We don't find a depiction of the Red Sea being parted by Moses and a bunch of soldiers being swallowed up by it. You would think they would have made some kind of monument to all the soldiers who lost their lives because of, Ramses II. Who Ramses II, we all know, loved to build monuments. You go to Egypt, that's all you find. You find Ramses everywhere, statues everywhere, stuff that he did all over the place. It's the Ramses II hieroglyphic that they tried to say was the Pharaoh, the one with him on a chariot, chasing down the Hittites. You don't find none of this stuff that relates to the Bible. But, we're going to get out of Kemet, because I don't want people to think that ancient Egypt is the only place we can find the accomplishments of African people. Let's go south into the Sudan, or to Nubia. We can go to Kerma. Kerma was once the capital of Kush. Now, when you go to Kerma, you find a great civilization there. You find a great civilization that had, a marketplace. They had agriculture. They had palaces. Now, in Kerma, you find the oldest mud brick structure still standing, going back, 2000 BCE, called the Dafufa. Now, on top of the Dafufa once stood a temple surrounded by palaces, surrounded by, a community that had marketplaces. They had schools. They had agriculture, farming. They had everything that you would expect a civilized civilization to have. All this stuff was there. It's in the Sudan. So, we're going to say that, white people came from the Sudan as well. White people came from there, or they built all this stuff as well. We can't say that. We know that the ancient Egyptians came up from Nubia. You find temples. You find temples and pyramids in Sudan as well. You find more pyramids in the Sudan than you find in Egypt. A lot of you know this. Now, Kerma also has one of the oldest cemeteries on earth, going back 7,500 BCE. We know that, Nubia, we know that the Egyptians ruled Nubia as well as Egypt. We know that Taharka was one of the pharaohs that did so. You can find many rulers down in Nubia who ruled along with Egypt, because of course we know Egypt ruled Nubia for a point of time. But when you go there and we look at these old pyramids, when we look at the civilizations, the ruins are still there. We're talking about ancient ruins that go back, thousands of years. They have found hieroglyphs there, writings going back 5,000 BCE, depictions of cattle going back 5,000 BCE. Nobody is telling you about this stuff. We can go even further south into Meroe, where, they produce iron there. They made swords. They made a lot of the things that you find, the little castings and molds you find in ancient Egypt. You find those castings in Meroe, where they molded iron. These people were not primitive. Africans was not primitive. We had structure. We had governmental structure. We had civilization. We had agriculture. We had schools. And this is what, the school books are not telling people. You go to school and you learn about, slavery and Dr. King and this and that. Meanwhile, over in the Cairo Museum, over in, the British Museum, we have, the tombs. We have the bodies of African pharaohs, African accomplishments, great things that we did as a people. But you don't find these things. Nobody is talking about them. Now let's go over to the Niger River Valley, where the Africans control a 2,600-mile long-distance trade route that went from Sierra Leone up into Mali, where it curved, went through Niger, went through Nigeria, and came out into the Atlantic Ocean. Now, all along this river, which we know the Niger River is one of the longest rivers in the world, but all along this river, they had cities, they had towns, they had civilizations. You had cities in Fouta Djallon, you had cities in Timbuktu, you had civilizations that had agriculture, they had farming going on there, they had, structure, marketplaces. They traded in all kinds of things. Now, the Niger River Valley, it was known for the camel caravans. So we're talking about Africans on the top of camels selling everything from gold to herbs and spices. It was known for being one of the, main trade routes of African people, and they traded with people from all over. We're talking about going back to, over 500 BCE where this stuff was taking place. But again, they don't talk about this stuff. They don't tell you about these things in the history books. They don't show you this stuff on TV. And it's amazing how, you get reenactments of so many things, but nobody reenacts, the accomplishments of African people and the things that we did. There's movies made about Hitler, movies made about all kinds of things, but nobody wants to talk about what we did during ancient times. And the whole thing is they show you, feed the children. They'll show you tribal things in Africa, and they got, African Americans being ashamed of being from Africa because they think that we was just a bunch of butt-naked people dancing around the fire with masks on, with bones in our lips, or with discs in our lips, or, rings around our necks. This wasn't the case. They don't tell you that the oldest legal system we can find in Kemet, in ancient Egypt, based on the concept of Ma'at, which is truth. They don't tell you about the Nook. The Nook is where you can find one of the most advanced civilizations going back 1000 BCE. These people was highly advanced. You can find the oldest example of swearing in a court system with the Nook people. They had the accused stand between two monoliths facing the sun and facing their god they called Num or Nam, and swore to tell the truth. They have one of the oldest examples of a higher court system where if things didn't get settled in the lower courts, you went to the higher courts that was held in an enclosed shrine. This is the Nook people. How many people know about the Nook? A lot of people don't know about the Nook and their accomplishments and how advanced their civilization was. They are known for these terracotta statues. You can find them in a lot of museums. We're talking about 1400 to 2000 year old terracotta figurines that these people made. They was highly advanced. Nobody know what happened to them. They disappeared around 300 AD. But these people was advanced. They knew a lot. So now with Egypt, they came up with Egyptology to try to rob us of our accomplishments in Egypt. Now, there is no Arabology or Europeanology, but if it wasn't nothing special about African people, they wouldn't be digging up our ancestors and putting their bodies, on display, putting the babies' bodies on display, the hair on display, everything from our toothpaste to gum and jewelry. All these things we find in ancient Egypt, you can look in the Cairo Museum or in the British Museum and find the accomplishments of African people. Meanwhile, your kid is sitting in school right now learning about slavery, learning about, Dr. King. We came from slaves and we were nothing before that. If it wasn't for people like Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark, who said, we come from greatness. We come from great civilizations. We come from kings and queens. We wasn't slaves. We was prisoners of war. If it wasn't for these men standing up and saying this, we wouldn't know a lot of the things that we know today. But you get black people today who have no clue who these men are. You get people that look at, Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben and say that, these niggas is crazy. Something was wrong with them. And they run back to these preachers and pay these preachers, all this money to tell them lies and fairy tales. To tell them that it's okay that we was enslaved because, God allowed it to happen. It was God's will that we was enslaved. That, it's okay we was enslaved because, we disobeyed God. We was bad. But they don't explain how all the other races got to be bad and get away with it. Just us Africans, we got enslaved and we got punished because we was bad, because we supposedly broke some covenant. They don't explain this stuff. It don't make any sense when you try to explain it anyway. They don't explain it. And you got to understand, if you believe that, we just got saved from a life of sin, because you got black people who honestly believe that, it was God's will that we got put in slavery. We got saved from a life of savagery and a life of sin and destruction by the white man, brought over to this country and placed in slavery because we wasn't acting right. People actually believe that. And they won't admit it until you start getting into that line of questioning. And I dialogue with people, and I have had black people tell me this, that, you know, we wasn't doing nothing in Africa. We ain't doing nothing. We was running around naked. We ain't had no civilizations. What? And this just happened, which is one of the reasons why I'm doing this video. I mean, I had about 4 black people tell me this in a week span. So I'm like, this shit is crazy. I got to do a video. I got to talk about this. You need to wake up and understand. Like, I think it's enough information out there now to where people can look and see, if they want to see, you know, what's going on, what took place. But you got people who honestly believe that we came from nothing. Meanwhile, you got people like Creflo Dollar and TD Jakes. They get to make millions of dollars telling you lies and fairy tales. While Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark, you know, they died poor, trying to tell you that you were great, that you came from greatness, that you were something. Now, you have to understand that this whole effort to hide the accomplishments of African people is backed by money. It's backed by power, by influence, by persuasion. This whole system of religion is backed by billions of dollars. It's backed by a whole structure. You got a pope, you got churches, you got so many things to make this stuff look authentic and to make it, you know, to validate it. It's backed by so much money and people, you know, to cover up the money. They put billions of dollars into covering up our history, to keeping it away from us. You got to understand, these people control the education system. So they decide on what your kid gonna learn. They decide. All this stuff is backed by history. A history of money, of murder, of war. You know, mass graves we find. I mean, they found so many mass graves in Africa, you know, of people being wiped out. Remember the Tasmanian people, wiped out, gone, extinct. And you're not gonna find another one. This stuff is backed up by so much. And, you know, of course, it's going to be tough to figure out the truth, to find out what's real. And the only place we can go to is into books. But when you actually go over into Africa, the proof is right there. And they know that your ass ain't going to go to Africa because they done scared you away from Africa, because they keep showing you feed the children. They keep showing you all the stuff, you know, that's going on over there. They done scared you away from going there. So the whole thing is, all the stuff we talk about in these videos, you know, videos I put out and other people put out about Africa, all the stuff we talk about, you know, people are not sure if it's true or not. They're not 100% sure. Some people still waiting for the white man to validate what we say, or they're waiting for TV to back up the information that we put out. And that's a shame. And that's what's taking place, because they back their lie with so much money, and we not backed by money. We can't even get our people to buy a fucking book. We're not backed by, you know, a whole structure, a whole system, you know, to help us put out the truth. We're not backed by that, but they have television. They have influence and power to back up the lie, you know, to cover up your accomplishments, to cover up your history. And when I say they, I'm talking about a governmental structure. Again, I don't buy into that whole every white man is covering up the accomplishments of black people. No. Because our education system is controlled by our government. This is a governmental structure that is in place that has been covering up our accomplishments for a long time, hundreds of years. And people got to wake up, and you got to put effort into it. If you want to figure out the truth and you want to know what's going on, pick up a book. Go buy a book. This is why I have books popping up on the screen, sources, so you can see where I get a lot of my information from. You know, you get some time for people who can afford it. Go to Africa. Go there and look at some of this stuff. You can go and find and look and see these civilizations. You can find videos about this stuff. Some people just, you know, they don't care about the accomplishments of African people. They don't care what we have done. They wait until the conversation, you know, happens. A conversation starts about our civilization, our accomplishments, and they don't got no input. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to jump into the conversation and say, hey, well, wait a minute. The Africans, we did this. We invented this. People don't know how to say that because they never got the information, which is why I'm putting out this video. You need to understand that we wasn't just a bunch of butt-naked people in Africa. We had civilized civilizations backed up with money, power, kings, and queens. Now understand, before European conquest, there was no debate of whether or not Africans was sophisticated or advanced or not. There was no argument because it was plain to see. It was everywhere. You know, our advancement was everywhere. Our accomplishments you can see all over the place. Now we can go to Luango in the Congo. You can see that these people had a royal family. They had a royal palace. The complex stretched over 1.5 miles long. They entertained a lot of prominent people there. They entertained kings and royalty. They entertained Europeans. They came in there and they can see that these African people was advanced. They were skilled at mathematics and science and astrology. As a matter of fact, Luango in the Congo is where you find one of the oldest calculators on earth. This is the Ashango bone. It is the fibula of a baboon. It's over 20,000 years old. We were advanced. We had an advanced civilization. I mean, there was no debate back then. You can see it. The Europeans know. They know what we had. So you had the Europeans come in there and they sat and they dined with these Africans. They knew that the Africans was sophisticated. They was advanced. They knew that they had gold. They had wealth. These people traded. The Luango traded with people from all over the world. They had trade routes that they owned. And what happened was you had the Europeans and missionaries coming there. They converted a lot of the people to Christianity. And later, when slavery was, starting out, they came in there and they basically stripped the whole place of its wealth, enslaved a lot of the people, wiped out a lot of the people. They looted the place. They came in there and they was the ones who was acting like savages and stripped the place of its wealth. This is what governments do. This is what happened with a lot of Africa, as you will see when you start doing the research. You had advanced civilizations. You had kings and queens that was nice, that was cool with these Europeans because they was doing business with them. And that's what you do in the business world. You invite people over. Come to my palace, sit down and see, what I got. Let's talk. And they got stabbed in the back. And that's what happened. Stabbed in the back. A lot of these people became slaves. You might be a descendant of one of them. You don't even know. You have no idea. And this is what was going on. So you got to understand that this stuff it's not no secret. They know what we was able to do. They know how advanced we was. I mean, the palace still exists. It's still there. It's in ruins. Here it is. You can see it. This ain't no story that you got to go get validated by some dude on CNN or on, public broadcasting system or one of these Discovery channels or History Channel where they tell nothing but lies. You can go and see it for yourself. They try to hide this stuff from you, but you can't hide it because it's still there. You just got to do the research and you got to look for it and you got to see how advanced African people was because they know already. It ain't no secret to them. They know. They know. Now we also have the Kilwa in Tanzania along the Swahili coast. The same story. You have an advanced civilization of people. You have people with a royal family. They had cities. They traded in everything from oil, gold, ivory, everything that you would consider to be a luxury product in the 13th and 15th century. These people traded in it. They sold it until the Portuguese, Vasco da Gama, and the Europeans came and, basically looted the city, ransacked the place, stripped it of its wealth, wiped out a lot of the people, enslaved some of them. And, it still stands today. Still stands today, the ruins of this great African civilization. You can find the ruins still today. You can find traces of these people still today, but nobody talks about them. You don't know nothing about them. They don't even acknowledge that these people exist. You only find it in books. They don't even talk about this stuff. You don't see no video on it. And this is the crazy thing. You need to understand that mainstream media, they're not going to come out and admit that they committed genocide. These governments are not going to admit they killed off and stripped the wealth from these African civilizations. But the whole spit in your face is that they won't admit that we did something. That, we did something that was great, that was good. That's the part that's crazy. It's like, if you invite some people over to your mansion, let's say you wealthy, you successful, you invite some people over. They come over, they eat with you. You show them how advanced you are. You show them your accomplishments and that you did great things. But then they come back with a bunch of people and then rob you, strip you of all your wealth. So, years later, you on the street, you homeless, you ain't got nothing. And these people walking around, they got everything. They got money, they got wealth, and they won't even admit that you did something great with your life. They won't even admit that you accomplished all these things and that at one point you was wealthy. They won't even admit it. They won't even tell nobody, hey, yo, this boy used to be the man. He had money, he had wealth, he had power. We took it from him, but he did accomplish these great things. They won't even do that. They won't even do that. And then, the descendants of these people, they have no clue. You have no clue. Again, you could be related to these people. You can come from these people. You have no clue. But you don't even know what these people accomplished and the great things that they did, because a lot of people just don't go look. People rather watch Empire. They don't care. And then when a conversation arises, when you get in an argument with somebody, you can't even come up with facts to debate with. So you accept what they said because, it sounds good. You accept that we want nothing but, naked people dancing around the fire with bones in our lips. People just accept that because they don't have the information. Nobody wants to look around and do the research. Nobody wants to fight for the accomplishments of African people. So we have to really start looking and doing the research of, what our African ancestors accomplished. Looking at these civilizations and seeing how great they were. Looking at the royal families and seeing, who these people really were. What did they accomplish? What did they invent? What did they do? I mean, it's amazing. You can look in so many places in Africa, so many different countries, and see that these people had kingdoms. They had sultans. They had royal families. And, it's a shame that, a lot of black people have no clue about this. And, you go over there and all we find is ruins. And you got mostly white people writing about this stuff. You got mostly Europeans writing about the history of African people. The conquest of African people. You find Europeans writing about it, putting this stuff in books. And, we just don't know about it. We're not taught this stuff. So you have to really start researching your history and knowing that we came from greatness. And knowing that we came from, we had royal families that had more money than, Britain, had more money than, Sweden. A lot of these countries that got royal families today. Mansa Musa, another example, rich dude. He was a Muslim. He converted to Islam for political reasons. And stinking rich. Super rich. Supposed to be worth over $400 billion. A lot of people don't even know about Mansa Musa. And we got to start looking back at our history and seeing the MO. And the MO is always the same. You have an advanced civilization of African people. You have an advanced civilization of people who was, trading all over the world, who was sophisticated, who was advanced. And Europeans came in there, and wiped them out. We can go and look at the Kumasi in Ghana. These people, highly advanced civilization, traded, and so many different things, ivory, gold. The civilization was basically blown to pieces by the Europeans, blown up, wiped out. We can also look at Timbuktu. Timbuktu is one of the richest, it was one of the biggest cities in the world. It was about 4 or 5 times bigger than London. It was a major city, major hub where they traded in everything. Again, ransacked, wiped out by the Europeans. And you keep finding this stuff all over. You can go and look at Benin, between Nigeria and Togo, another advanced civilization. These people traded in a lot. They was known for having, the Great City Walls that was about 4 times longer than the Great Walls of China. Another advanced African civilization, again, wiped out by Europeans. And again, you're going to keep finding this same story over and over. Advanced African civilization, British invasion or French invasion, wiped out. African people wiped out, the civilization left in ruins, and these Europeans, the British basically went in there and they bulldozed, they wiped out a lot of ruins, a lot of structures, I should say, and left them in ruins to where you can't hardly, recognize a lot of the civilizations that African people had. A lot of people don't realize that the British control a lot of countries in Africa, and they still control a lot of countries in Africa. A lot of these people that's in place and in power in Africa, as I talked about in the previous video, these dudes is puppets. They're being controlled. They're being purposely put in there to keep the people in line. Meanwhile, outside governments strip the Africans, the land, of its wealth and its resources. And it's the same MO. You go around and you're going to find the same thing when it comes to ancient African civilizations. I mean, and this is what we find, dating from, ancient Egypt, up until today. We can look and we can clearly see the accomplishments of African people, ancient African people, leading all the way up to European conquest. Now, you will be hard pressed today to find any other continent on the face of the earth that had more kings, that had more wealth, that had more success than the Africans. I mean, more wealth comes out of that continent than any other continent on earth. Everybody knows that. I mean, the wealth that it produced, we don't even really know the numbers, but we know it's high billions, hundreds of billions of dollars that is produced there. You're not going to find another continent that is producing this. This is African people we're talking about. Again, Africa feeds the world. Talked about this before. You need to understand that even after, the ancient world was done and over with and European conquest happened, slavery occurred, of course. And even during slavery, we had Africans, again, African Americans now, inventing amazing things and coming up with amazing things. We have, Garrett Morgan, who invented the traffic lights and gas masks. We have Benjamin Bradley, who invented the steam engine. We have Benjamin Montgomery, who invented the propeller. We have so many African Americans that invented so many different things. You got Otis Boykins, who invented the pacemaker. You got Philip Downing, who invented the mailbox with the hinged doors that protect your mail. You got, the list goes on and on. If you've seen Hidden Colors, the whole Hidden Colors series, they talk about a lot of the inventions and accomplishments that African Americans, came up with, during slavery, after slavery, up until modern day. We are responsible for a lot of the things in America. And again, you can go back into ancient times and see a lot of the stuff that we still use today, like chewing gum and toothpaste, you can find in ancient Africa, you can find in ancient Kemet, and you can attribute its existence to African people, period. And we got to start putting this information out, and people need to start knowing it and putting it into their head. You need to start studying it and learning this information, because, they're covering it up and they're spending billions of dollars to keep it out of the knowledge of your children, to keep it out of, your knowledge. You need to know this stuff. You need to go and look for this stuff. And again, like I said, I'm putting this video out because it's just an overwhelming amount of black people who have absolutely no clue that, Africa was so advanced and so civilized. North Africa, the Sahara wasn't always desert. It was green for a long period of time, thousands of years. And they grew stuff there. I mean, the Nile fed North Africa, still do to this day. You need to understand that so much came off of the accomplishments of African people, and we still use the products. A lot of these things make our life easier today, and we don't get the recognition that we should get. Now, one of the first things I started reading about, before I started getting into Africa and ancient Africa, I started looking at the accomplishments of African Americans, stuff that we did here in America. And, it's amazing about, what we don't know. A lot of history that African Americans, contributed to the advancement of America, and and to the creation of America, and to the sovereignty of Americans. We played a lot of prominent roles, a lot of pivotal roles in the Revolutionary War, and much of the infancy of America and the whole war between us and King George III. Now, Glenn Beck, and I got to give him credit for this. I'm not a big Glenn Beck fan, but I gave him a lot of respect for doing this show. Now, Glenn Beck he did a whole show on, black founding fathers, where he talked about the contributions that African Americans made to America and to, making America free. Take a look at this.
There is a hunger in America for the truth, and tonight, I think we're going to blow your mind. You're going to have to ask yourself a couple of questions by the end of the program. Why would our schools leave all of this history out? I mean, this is some of the greatest American story that you've ever heard. Why would they do that? And it's everywhere. You just don't know where to look. If you take a look at the revolutionary paintings of revolutionary times, here it is. It's the Boston Tea Party. Bunch of white guys, and then these people strangely looking like Indians, and they're not. But that's it. Not a lot of racial diversity. If you watch movies, one a great movie. This is John Adams. You watch John Adams, and you don't see a lot of racial diversity. I'm currently watching Johnny Tremaine. This is. I love this movie. I remember this growing up. I was watching it with my kids just last night, and I noticed there are a couple of American Indians, but you don't see any African Americans unless they're slaves. They will show people as slaves, but that's it. Now, I want to show you a painting of the Battle of Bunker Hill. Here's the Battle of Bunker Hill. Bunch of white guys, right? Unless you know where to look. Right here. That's Peter Salem. He was actually the hero of the battle. It doesn't look like he's a hero there. He looks like he's cowering behind the white guy with a sword. He was the hero of the battle. And he saved scores of American lives that day. Why don't we know this? Look at the picture of the Battle of Lexington. 150 Americans. There it is. Do you see any faces of color in this painting? They were all members of the Reverend Jonas Clark's church. They went out. They were actually, if I'm not mistaken, David, they were in church at the time, right?
He called them together at church,
okay,
yes.
So we called together at church and then said, let's go. And they went to defend their town. When the shot heard around the world was over that day, there were 18 Americans lying on the ground. What you don't see in this painting are the equal numbers of whites and blacks. They were white and black patriots. It was a mixed church. Did you even know that happened? One of those injured patriots on the ground in this painting was a black man named Prince Estabrook. I bet you never heard of Prince Estabrook before. How about the painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware? Bunch of white guys, right? No. Look here. African American, helping row the boat across. You know what his name was? Prince Whipple. He fought alongside Washington during the Revolution. Take a look at this one. This painting of, this is the Marquis de Lafayette. If you look at this, you just think, oh yeah, and then he made his slave dress up like I don't know what. But that's what you would think, right? This guy is incredibly important. This guy may have won the Revolutionary War. James Armistead was his name. How did he win the Revolutionary War? Double spy. I'm going to let David tell the story here in a minute, but basically the Brits thought that he was spying for them, but he was spying for General Washington. He'd give the Brits bad intel and reveal the good critical information to General Washington. Did you know this story? Why? I'm so tired of people saying, well, it was just the white people, white people, white people. No. No. Why are we intentionally leaving others out?
James Armistead.
Yeah, the spy.
It's a great one. Because James Armistead, after the Battle of Richmond, he's in Virginia, and a lot of the battles do not happen in Virginia. But after the siege of Richmond, he's there, he sees what the British have done in his home state, and he goes to enlist. He said, I want to help. And he really, I don't know why, but he liked Lafayette. He went to Lafayette, young French general, 19 years old, said, I want to fight with you. And so they make this agreement, and what happens is James Armistead goes over to Benedict Arnold's camp. He's a British general then, traitor British general, and he says, oh, these mean Americans, they mistreat me. I've escaped as a slave. Please let me stay with you. And Arnold says, okay, you can wait on us. And so he is part of Benedict Arnold's staff, waiting on Benedict Arnold. And Arnold's one of the generals, which means he meets with all the other generals. So he's meeting with Cornwallis all the time. And so James Armistead is just serving them and doing all the right stuff and just picking up intelligence like crazy. Every day he gets back with Lafayette, says, here's what they're doing, here's where they're going, here's what they're going to do next. And kept feeding the information back. And Cornwallis in this time got really comfortable with James and said, you know, I don't want to ask you to do something you don't want to do, but would you consider being a spy against your former guys there, the Americans? Would you be a British spy and tell us what they're doing? He said, yeah, I guess if you want me to, I will. You know, if you're going to force me to, I will. So he goes back.
It'd be tough getting across the lines, though, but I'll risk it for you.
I'll try it.
Right.
So he ends up saying, yeah, I'll do it. And what happens is when they leave Richmond, they decide that they're going down to Yorktown, and they're going to go down there. So what happens is Armistead's fed all that information to Washington and Lafayette. They're going to Yorktown. And he's let the British know that, oh, there's no Americans around down there. It's a real safe place to go. The Americans are elsewhere. So the British the British fleet drops the soldiers off in Yorktown, and the fleet takes off because there's no Americans around. Right then, the French fleet came in and blockaded the port, so the British couldn't get their ships back. And now we've got all the American troops waiting for them when they got up. They're pinned in on the peninsula. Can't go anywhere. So he probably cut months, maybe years off the revolution by what he did.
Why do we not know this story because really, you talk to African Americans, and they'll say, well, I mean, I think I had Al Sharpton say this to me. Well, you give me somebody like Rosa Parks up there. He said this about these three gentlemen.
Yeah.
Get rid of all the white guys. You give me somebody like Rosa Parks up there. Why don't you have any color there? And that's what prompted this show. There is. Why leave people like this out?
Let me give you an example of how well we used to know this. You know, the painting you showed of Washington crossing the Delaware, this little jewel right here. You mentioned that this is Oliver Cromwell, and he is. But up here are Prince Whipple, but the other one's Oliver Cromwell. There's actually two blacks in the front of that boat, and they served not as slaves. They were free men who served with Washington on the general staff throughout the Revolution from start to finish. Now, this painting that you showed was done in 1851 by a German, and it was done in Europe. It wasn't done in America. It was done in Europe to show the Europeans, here's what the American Revolution looked like, which meant back then we knew blacks were involved, whites were involved. At the back of the boat, there's actually a lady dressed up in men's clothes. This book right here is an old textbook from 1855. It's a great book. It's written by a black historian, a first black appointed federal office. It's called The Colored Patriots of the American Revolution. Now, we studied that as a textbook. That is not a skinny little book that we have there. I mean, there's a lot of patriots in the American Revolution that we studied. Black patriots.
When did America have its first African-American judge? What year would you say? Anybody, take a guess. Tell me.
1768. Wentworth Cheswell, New Hampshire, elected to office in New Hampshire. He was reelected for the next 49 years, held 8 different political positions. Really cool story about him is we all know that Paul Revere made his midnight ride. We also know he wasn't the only guy riding that night. Another guy riding, Wentworth Cheswell, black and white riding.
Now, how is it possible? Did you know that we had an African-American ride to say the British are coming, the British are coming? Amy did. Amy did. Anybody else besides Amy know that? 2, 3. Okay, 3 people in the audience.
He was such a great guy, and we never hear about him because he rode north and Paul Revere rode west. And Revere was going after Reverend Jonas Clark's church because that's where Hancock and Adams were, was him. And that's where we had blacks and whites, as you pointed out, laying on the ground after that battle. Wentworth Cheswell rode north telling people the British are coming. And it was from the north that all those people came to Boston to take on the British at Bunker Hill and everywhere else. So we don't hear about his ride because the British went west, and that's where all the action happened. But it was a couple of days later when all these people started coming down from New Hampshire and Vermont and elsewhere, and that's where he had ridden, telling them what was up.
All right, David, explain quickly. Let's go through these people.
Let's go through these. This guy right here, this is Lemuel Haynes. Lemuel Haynes is a soldier in the American Revolution. He is a black preacher. He's the first black preacher ordained in America that was a pastor of a white congregation in Vermont, Massachusetts, New York, several places.
A black professor in
black
a
preacher.
white.
That's right, in a white church.
Yeah, black minister.
Black minister in a white church in 4 different states. He was ordained in the Congregationalist denomination in 1785. He's the first black to receive a master's degree in America. He got that in 1804 from Middlebury College. So Lemuel Haynes, every year on Washington's birthday, he preached a special sermon about George Washington, his commander-in-chief, in all of his churches where he was.
Unbelievable.
So we don't hear about Lemuel Haynes. This is Benjamin Banneker. I think he's the most brilliant scientist in American history. This guy, unbelievable what he did. He's the guy
more so than Franklin.
I would put Franklin and Banneker almost equal. Now Franklin did a lot of inventions. This guy one time took a pocket watch. He taught himself how to read. He taught himself science. He wrote an almanac that 10 years ahead he was able to predict to the minute solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, 10 years before they happened. I mean, by watching the motion through a telescope, unbelievable what the guy did. He once took the back off a pocket watch, saw how it worked, went home and carved a wooden clock with all the gears, mainspring, and it was accurate to within 1 minute a year. A wooden clock the guy did.
Cow.
He's the guy who laid out Washington, D.C. He's the surveyor who did all that. He's a brilliant mathematician. Jefferson gave him...
Never knew this.
No. Jefferson gave him his example to France, said, hey, you guys in France think that blacks are inferior? Here's Benjamin Banneker.
Okay, I have
Jefferson
2 minutes total, so quickly there, and then we have one
right here, James Armistead. We talked about the first double spy, really cool guy. This is Richard Allen. He's the first founder of a black denomination in America. He is a soldier in the American Revolution. He actually is the first guy to practice medicine, taught by sign of the Declaration, Dr. Benjamin Rush. Just a really cool story.
Okay.
So really cool.
All right, good. Now tell me.
Here to these guys.
Now let's take the full of the first representatives. I asked, when did we have our first black Speaker of the House? When did we have the first Speaker of the House? 1789. When did we have our first black Speaker of the House? I bet most people would say never.
Never, except it was right here. Joseph Hayne Rainey. Joseph Hayne Rainey of South Carolina is the first black to preside over the House of Representatives. These are the first 7 blacks elected to Congress. You have here Senator Hiram Rhodes Revels, the first black U.S. senator elected. He was a minister of the gospel. He was a missionary. He worked with Frederick Douglass. He recruited 3 regiments of black soldiers in the Civil War, and he was a missionary to slaves in the South. You have here Benjamin Turner, Josiah Wall, the large. This guy right here is really cool. Robert Brown Elliott is probably the most brilliant guy of that era. He actually took on the vice president of the Confederacy in a debate on the floor and just tore his head off. The racist Alexander Stephens. It was a great debate.
When did we turn? Were these guys proud Americans, or did they say
this is the epitome of what we were just talking about. These were individual guys. Half of these guys taught themselves to read. Half of these guys were slaves, and 5 years later they're sitting in Congress. And as slaves, it was a capital offense to learn to read. So these guys in 5 years, and I'll guarantee you read their speeches and records of Congress, you better have a dictionary and a thesaurus in both hands, because you won't understand the language they use. It is so brilliant what these guys did. But
were they there to say the white man is bad and the America is bad?
No. And these guys were Richard Allen. Let me go back here. Richard Allen had been in slavery. Richard Allen was in slavery, and he held no bitterness at all. He says God would not allow bitterness even in Joseph when he was in prison. Do you think God will allow it in us? He said we can't have bitterness. He said, by the way, there were some whites who held us in slavery, but it's whites who are working for our freedom. I mean, these guys had no bitterness. They wouldn't allow it.
Back in just a second.
So now this is American history. I mean, not just African American history, but American history. History that directly affected, the progress of America. Events that took place in the infancy of America, the Revolutionary War we're talking about here, the Civil War, and these things happen, and you have African Americans who played prominent roles in major events, major wars, and you know nothing about it. Didn't tell me this stuff in school. I didn't learn about any of these people in school except for Frederick Douglass. Never knew it was a black man that rode with Paul Revere, or a spy who was with Benedict Arnold who was spying on him, that worked for the Marquis de Lafayette. Never knew about this stuff. Who knew? But, this stuff was, as he said in the video, it was printed in books in the 1800s, and now it's just, gone. They don't teach us this stuff. And it's one of the things that I wanted to talk about in this video too, when you can see, I was kind of trying to, explain it in my last video, but you can see where once this country was taken over by, the bankers, then our history went out the door. Everything changed. Once the school systems started to come into place, black history went out the door. So you had a school system. You had people who knew about the accomplishments of African people. You had in the North, once slavery was, abolished, and a lot of people don't realize this, that, the Declaration of Independence included a passage in there that was basically condemning slavery. Thomas Jefferson wrote a passage that was condemning slavery and was, cussing out King George III, and they wanted to abolish slavery. But this passage was removed from the Declaration of Independence by, I think it was Georgia and another state, and people who had money, who had an investment in slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, removed this whole passage out of the Declaration of Independence, because they put in there that they wanted to abolish slavery. Now, a lot of people don't know that 1776, we talk about it, 4th of July, the whole war happened and everything, and they was fighting for their freedom, fighting for their independence from King George III. So they did all of that. Why would you go through that and not free the slaves? But we know, of course, that the North said, forget, all this other stuff, and, we still going to free people in the North. And we know that it was Vermont. When Vermont broke away from New York, Vermont was one of the first states to basically write in their constitution the complete disbandment, the complete abolishment of slavery in Vermont. So they abolished slavery. We know Pennsylvania, they had basically put out there that they wanted a gradual decrease in slavery, over the next few years. And we know about, I think it was 1804, that the North was completely free of slavery. But this is something that you need to understand about the history of America. Again, I always talk about this stuff because people need to know that, slavery, they wanted slavery to be abolished. Once they got from under the rule of King George, slavery was to go. Now, this is Britain we're talking about. Who gave you your Bible? This was Britain. King James, again, gave it to these people, to black people, gave it to the people in America to say, hey, pound this into the slave's head. But here you have founding fathers who fought alongside of prominent African Americans who said, you know what, this ain't right. Because I know African Americans who contributed to our freedom, to the freedom of America. So we need to, not just that we're talking about wealthy African Americans, smart African Americans like Frederick Douglass, who was there, who contributed to America. You've seen that they had a whole Supreme Court judge system. We had senators, black judges. They was sitting there and they were serving with these black people, with African Americans who played pivotal roles in the success of America. So of course the North was like, we got to abolish slavery. It's not right. And you need to understand that, because you got a lot of black people walking around with this pent up animosity about slavery, and they don't realize that, you're talking about 13 colonies here. The 13 colonies did not control all of America. They didn't run the whole thing. So we get upset. We wanted slavery to be immediately abolished. Once the Revolutionary War was fought and it was won, America declared its independence in 1776. And we was like, of course, y'all still enslaved black people. What's up with that? But you need to understand the history. These people, 13 colonies, did not control all of America. You still had Britain, who controlled states. You had France, who controlled much of America until the Louisiana Purchase, where, $15 million basically bought the middle of America, you might as well say. Another thing that I have to say, and a lot of people need to understand, Mexico, they control a lot of territories in America. Almost the whole West Coast was Mexican territory until they had it basically taken away from them. Still, you need to understand, you had Spain controlling the South and Florida. You had other countries who had stake in America. It wasn't just the 13 colonies and the founding fathers. So you need to get this out your head, black people, African Americans, that everybody wanted slavery, because obviously they abolished slavery in the North, and then after the Civil War, slavery was completely abolished. But you need to know that there was white people who was fighting for your freedom because they knew and they fought and they served with African Americans who were geniuses, who played pivotal roles in the success and the freedom of America. And you need to know that. So stop walking around with all this pent up anger thinking that, everybody just hated black people and the founding fathers was for slavery and this and that. You had black people there who served with Washington, who served with Thomas Jefferson, who did amazing things in America, and you have no clue because they're not telling it to you, because you're not looking for it. So seriously, we got to start doing this research. You need to start to understand the accomplishments of African American people. So yes, of course, I want African Americans to understand the role that we play here in America, that we play a pivotal role in the success of America, that we play pivotal roles throughout the history of America. We built this country with slave labor. Europeans, white people got rich off of, the backs, the death, the pain, the suffering of African people. And that's just the truth. We can see their wealth all around us today, but you need to understand the history behind it, because, we take a lot of stuff. We get a lot of backlash. We take a lot of crap about us playing, fictional roles. Johnny Storm and Rue from the Hunger Games. I mean, look at The Wiz. People got upset saying, this is an all black cast, but they forget that the original Wizard of Oz was an all white cast. Wasn't no black people in that movie. So people get upset. We take a lot of backlash. Now, if Spike Lee did a movie about George Washington and he cast, Denzel Washington as good old George, then, they would get upset. But they can go ahead and they can take Europeans, they can take white people and cast them as, pharaohs, as ancient Egyptians. They can show the ancient Egyptians, walking around and the people being white, the civilization being white, and they don't put in there anything about a black, pharaoh. They can do that because they run Hollywood. They put money behind their deception. And I'm talking about the movie industry. I'm talking about the government. I'm talking about people who know what they're doing. I'm talking about a system that has billions of dollars that they don't mind spending to cover up our success. That's what I'm talking about. You need to understand that. We got to really start. We got to really start learning, what we have accomplished as African people. We really got to start putting this information out there and educating our children, to the success, because, they are covering it up. They cover it up well, and they spend money to do so. Now, I get this question a lot. A lot of people say this all the time. If the ancient Egyptians were so great, if African people did so many great things and were so successful, what happened? How did they get conquered? What happened to the ancient Egyptians? How did that civilization get, taken over by the Persians and the Greeks? What happened? And, I tell them the same thing that you've seen today. The same stuff. I mean, just look at Syria, for example. You have this whole ISIS coming into the country. Same thing with Iraq, we can say. Coming into the country and taking over. So what happens is what? Fear. People scared to die. People scared to fight. It's the same thing. People scared. So if it's an army that's coming in and invading our country, 1,000 people, right? It's 1 million of us. But you only got 100 people that's saying, okay, let's go get these bastards. Let's fight for our country. And they go to fight and they turn around and look. And, everybody else standing behind them, scared to fight. What can they do? 100 people can't go fight 1,000 people. It's stupid. So you got to make a choice. Either you can go die, or you can go join the rest of the people, put your head down and flee. And that's what took place. You had an invading civilization who came in there. Now, when the Persians invaded, you had, for about 70 years, you had a civil war. You had the people in Egypt fighting back against the Persians until, they overwhelmed them and there's nothing they could do. But that's basically what took place. Fear. The people got scared. They didn't fight. They didn't come together. Instead of us coming together and fighting, what are we doing? We arguing and bickering back and forth about black, white, and stupid shit. Hip hop battles. That's what happened to those civilizations. They got controlled with fear. If a bunch of troops came into Philadelphia or came into your state, right now, and they start killing people, but then some people, they say, go get in this truck or go here. I mean, what are you going to do? You're either going to get your gun and fight, or you're going to listen to them. You're going to listen to them. You're going to put your head down and say, okay, and do what they tell you to do. And that's what took place back then. a lot of people just shut up. They wanted to save their own ass. They didn't want to fight for their country. They didn't want to fight for their freedom. And, you know, it was fear. Fear took over. And I can't blame people for wanting to, you know, you got a family. You got kids to feed. You got kids to worry about. You can't go fight. Everybody can't do it. But you need to understand the same thing is taking place today. The same thing. I mean, when you just look at, you know, the animal kingdom, you have a herd of buffalo. We're talking about hundreds of buffalo down there drinking water. Probably 4 or 5 lions come out and scare the whole herd away. They all go running, scattering all over the place, running. And you're like, why? I mean, just beat them. Just come together. All they got to do is turn around and say, no, we ain't taking this shit no more. You ain't eating another buffalo. You ain't eating another buffalo today. So imagine, I'd be just waiting for it to happen. I'd be like, yo, they're going to turn around one day. I know it's going to happen. They're going to turn around one day and say, you know what, this shit is over. And they're going to attack those lions. You know, but it never happens. They all go running all crazy. And that one poor buffalo, you know, gets attacked and gets eaten in front of everybody while they running, when they could just go save it. And that's what happened back then. That's what happened. That's what's happening now. You got people like me, people like you, those of you who watch these videos and you share them, who putting the information out, and we fighting hard trying to wake people up, but they don't care. They rather go cut and run. You know, they don't care. They're not willing to fight. They're not even willing to watch a video. That's how much people don't care. They don't even want to watch the information. They don't want to pick up a book. So this is what happened back then. This is what happened to, you know, ancient Egypt, to a lot of these advanced African civilizations. It's fear. Fear conquers all. I mean, imagine the Europeans coming into those African civilizations with their guns, you know, shooting up stuff, blowing up stuff. You know, the Africans couldn't even fathom, they couldn't envision of making a weapon of such destruction because it wasn't in them. You talk about a spiritual people, lived off the land. They invited the Europeans in and they taught them, showed them things. They could never envision them doing what they did to them. And that's the thing, you know, you get, you know, I've had white people say, you know, survival of the fittest, man, you know, get over it. You know, the white race, dominant race, and we took over, survival of the fittest. And I mean, it's outrageous. People get real dark when you get into it because you can argue back and forth. But when it comes down to it, you had a group, a government of Europeans basically wipe out innocent people. And that's what happened. It's conquest. They took over. That's what happened. I mean, you can look at it as a, you know, a manly way and say, you know, beat your chest and say, you know, we're strong. Or you can look at it and say, you know, and that's fucked up. That's evil. These people crazy. They sick. I can't believe they did that. Now, most people would disagree with the actions of the Europeans. They would disagree with it. Anybody who got any kind of empathy, you know, they would disagree with the actions of the Europeans, and they would say, you know, that's messed up what they did. But you get people who say, you know, survival of the fittest, you know, and Africans, we got what we deserve somehow, because they are ignorant about history, because they think that we was just savages running around butt naked. We was going to kill ourselves anyway, and we had no kind of sophistication. So as I said, I wanted to put this video out to get people to understand, you know, the accomplishments of African people, not just in Africa, but also in America as well. I mean, we contributed so much to this country, to America. I mean, a black man, Dr. Charles Drew, came up with the whole concept of a blood bank. I mean, blood banks save lives every day. So many people, probably one of you, your life has been saved because of the work that blood banks do. Seriously. And this is the African American person who came up with the concept. We need to really start looking at our history and learning it, and not being, you know, backed down by people who say we were primitive savages. People who come up with this information. I mean, these people have a whole ideology that we was nothing, that we ain't do nothing, we ain't accomplish anything, we was just savages. People really believe that. And it's amazing to me that when people are saying it, I mean, I read in the comments section sometimes. I read your comments, by the way. People debating in the comment section talking about, you know, the accomplishments of African people. And I look and I read and I see that, you know, a lot of people don't got no comeback. When you get these racist people who come into the comment section and say we ain't do shit, we was just monkeys, you know, we didn't accomplish anything. And I'm like, you know, I don't like to jump into people conversations a lot in the comment section. But I'm like, damn, you need to understand what we have done, what we have accomplished, what we can prove that we have accomplished. Because we can prove this stuff. We got the proof. It's still there. You have Europeans who wrote that we accomplished these things, which is why I always say I'm not here to shun all white people, to say all white people is evil. That's not me. You're not going to get me saying that. Because like I said, I know too many good white people. But you get Europeans who say it themselves. Hey, these people, not all Europeans, these people, this government did this to these Africans. These African people was great. They did this. They accomplished that. And this is what happened to them. We got to start writing these stories ourselves. We got to start putting this information out ourselves. Seriously. We got to start doing the work. At least know it. I mean, at least get the books and read it. I mean, you have people, I mean, this whole conscious community somehow got this whole notion. I don't know where it starts from that. I mean, it works in some cases. But this whole notion that if you read a book that was written by a white man, it's no good. Because he only wrote it to deceive everybody. Every white person wrote their book to deceive black people. And that's not the case. Because Dr. Ben would tell you himself, if he was still here, that he got a lot of his information from white scholars. I mean, where else you going to find the information? We were slaves. We were slaves. I mean, a lot of the books that got written about, we didn't know this information. You had independent people who went to these countries, who did the research on their own and wrote a book. And that's the thing. This is where you hide the information. The book is out there and you think somebody's reading it. You think it should be taught in your children's school, but it's not. So you got to go learn it. I mean, it's a wealth of information out there that we just don't know about because we don't know that somebody wrote the book. We don't know the book exists. When I go to the library, kid in the candy store, especially when I find a book that I didn't know nothing about, you know, information I never heard of, I'm like, wow, you know, who is this dude? And 9 times out of 10, a lot of the times, unfortunately, the author is European. And I got to give him credit for doing what he did because he gave the Africans credit. He ain't say, oh, the Europeans taught the Africans how to do this stuff. And a lot of these books that I put up on the screen, you'll see when you read them, I mean, they praise the Africans. They are amazed by what the Africans accomplished. Amazed. And they shun the actions of the Europeans. These are white people who wrote these books. You need to understand that. You need to understand that it's not everybody out here trying to cover up our history. And I always go into this because, you know, it's real easy for us to get upset. You know, African Americans to get upset and look at this stuff and start looking at this information and saying, you know what, fuck white people and I'm mad at white people. And we get upset at every single white person instead of getting upset at the government who is behind, you know, destruction of African civilization. These are governments that did this stuff. White people had no clue either. They obviously don't know. They don't know.
My friend Rika Drew sent me one of Glenn Beck's shows, the Founding Fathers things he does, and I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit just because I agree with some of what Glenn Beck says, but he's a little bit too much for me. But I started to watch it anyway, and it was about how black people in our history that had a lot to do with the way the founding of this country and what went on during the founding of this country have basically been eliminated from history books. And it did 2 things. It made me very emotional. Just because so many black people, including black people I know, only think that great things started with Martin Luther King or, you know, I don't know how to put it. If anything in here comes across as insulting, it is not intended to be. This was just fascinating to me, not just because of the fact that these, like Frederick Douglass and other people, who of course their names escape me at this point, but just how important they were to the founding of this country and how easily it was to just destroy them. Or not destroy them, but make them irrelevant. It's sad. It's sad because that means there are many groups of black people that grew up only thinking their only history in this country was as being slaves. I'm sorry I'm looking all over the place, but I'm trying to gather my thoughts because this really got to me. But that's what most black people have been taught. is that up until they were freed as slaves, or not, excuse me, up until Martin Luther King and the fight for civil rights, that's when the fight for civil rights started, and that's really where a lot of black history started. I mean, I know people know about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad, but the stuff as far as that was all stuff with black people fighting against the government, or fighting against slavery is what I mean, fighting against the government. Whereas these were stories about black people actually wanting to be Americans and being proud of being Americans. And that's not something I ever remember hearing. And I can understand how a group of people, and I'll say it one more time, I don't mean this in any way to be insulting, but I can understand how if I was a member of a group of people, that the only thing I was ever taught as far as my relation to America was that I was a slave and I had to fight just to be treated like a human being, I wouldn't like that country very much. But if I knew that there were black people that after they were freed wanted to be Americans and were proud to be Americans and worked for this country and worked to do great things in this country, I think that would change some people's feelings. Now, it wouldn't change the perception of the way people are treating them now, and that's a whole nother video. But it's had an impact on me, and I'm a white person. Let me put it that way. I'm a white dude, in case you haven't noticed. And just hearing that, you know, Abraham Lincoln was meeting with some of these black people and asking their opinions. I never heard that. The only thing I knew about Abraham Lincoln having to do with black people for the most part was owning slaves and freeing slaves. That is on a totally different level than actually talking to black people on an equal level and asking for help. That was just fascinating information to me. And it makes me understand why, if someone intentionally took this out of history books, if they did that, why they would, because it makes black people feel separate from this country. And maybe that's what they wanted when they took this information out, was to make black people not feel like part of the country and to make white people not feel like black people were part of the country. That they were just this group of people that were slaves that got freed and just had to be integrated, instead of a group of people that really wanted to be Americans. Like I said, this obviously got to me. It got to me and made me very emotional. But I'm trying to keep, you see, I just say the word emotional, and emotions come up. Because it's just messed up. And I feel bad not having known this. It's important. I'm trying to be a better person, as everyone knows, but I also want to be knowledgeable about my own history and about my own country and why I love my country and why I like to be an American. And part of that is that a lot of the people that were brought here as slaves when they were freed decided, or were the descendants of people that were brought here as slaves, whatever, that decided they wanted to be Americans. That there were actually white people back in the day that worked with them. It wasn't just slaves versus white people, or former slaves versus white people, which is the way I feel history was presented to me when I was growing up. I think that's all I need to say. Once again, I will put up links to these videos. Anyone that watches this and can't stand Glenn Beck, I don't really like him a lot either. But trust me, the information, and maybe you already maybe you're more educated than me and you knew everything he's going to say. Fine. I didn't know it. And it was fascinating. So once again, this is the third ending. I feel like this is like Lord of the Rings or something. I'm going to put up links, and that's that. Great videos, great information, and great to know that black people played a more important part to American history than just what I learned in school.
They don't know. They had no clue that we have contributed so much to the world. Not just, you know, material things, but the white man himself, the Asian themselves. They come from us. As I have explained in the previous video, we ain't just contribute materials, we contribute them. We ain't getting no white man without a black man. We ain't getting no Asian without a black man, black woman. So yeah, you get people who are appreciative of that. You get people who look at the research and look at the information and they see without prejudice, without bias, you know, just based strictly on truth, that African people contributed more to this world than any other civilization on the planet. African people, not only did we give birth to every race on the face of the earth, but we contributed more than any other race. And when you say that to people today, I mean, it's just an automatic no, or automatic you crazy. And, you know, people can't fathom it, but it's plain to see. And we still contributing, you know, so much to the world today. As I said, Africa feeds the world, and that's just not a slogan. That is proven fact. You need to pay attention and look at it. You know, you, like I said, I always get on these Hebrews trying to get you to give up Africa for dusty ass Israel. They can have it. No way in the world I would give up Africa. Y'all crazy. The history and the culture there, the wealth. And they can't see that this is obviously a ploy by, you know, some European to get you to give up Africa and turn your back on Africa, which a lot of you have already. So yeah, again, this was my video, and you know, I hope people learned a lot from this video. And you know, I've been busy. I get a lot of messages, a lot of comments down there. I can't answer them all. You know, the views, thanks to you, or I should say the subscribers, thanks to you guys, has gone up a lot. And you know, it's tough to get at everybody. So I try to answer as many comments and, you know, questions as possible. I try to go through it. Of course, I'm busy. Just got back home to America. I'm back in Philly, and you know how that go. You know, I family members I haven't seen in years, and you know, they want to do stuff. They want to go out and hang out and stuff like that. So I've been running around and doing all kinds of stuff, and you know, chilling. But of course, I'm gonna keep putting out videos and keep doing what I'm doing. I have some new videos coming up soon, and hopefully this opened the eyes of a lot of people who had, you know, no clue. And you can see the accomplishments of African people, you know, here and abroad. And it's not just in Africa and in America. I'm talking about in Canada. You know, Hidden Colors talked about hockey. How many people knew that? Black people invented hockey. I mean, somewhere, some white guy's head is exploding. Boom. What do you mean black people invented hockey? I mean, not just in Canada and America and Africa. We can go South America. I mean, look at the Olmec. I mean, we can go Mexico. We can go China. We can go Japan. And the accomplishments of African people is everywhere. You need to start learning it and understanding it. Now, this is my video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next video.